George Beers decided that if he could write the rules in white man's language and take the game that he saw the Mohawks originate and make it more so-called civilized, maybe it could be called the national game of Canada, and they could really thumb their nose at the British saying, yes, we're a protector of England, but we have a national game and you don't have it. It's solely ours. We invented it, we play it well, and it belongs to Canada. And he wrote the rules so it could be played in a more civilized manner. It could be played in towns and not in fields where there are miles between goals and hundreds of players on a team. And he wrote the rules as Dr. Beers felt they might work. A short distance between goals, some 80 yards between goals, no more than 150 yards long the field would be. There would be 12 players on a team, no more than 12. There would be a person on the field called a referee, which the natives did not have. And there would be no tripping, biting, hitting, and all the things that the natives enjoyed doing in fun. And so George Beers made a set of rules, and it was picked up by the aristocracy in Canada. It was played in clubs, and it was played in a more civilized manner, and it drew great crowds and great attention. And so when they had developed the game a little further, and they decided to go to England and say to the English, look what we got. This is our national game. I know, you know, you're protecting us and all, but this is a Canadian national sport. It's called lacrosse. And so the English adopted the Canadian game, and then the Scots, and then the Welsh, and so on, and it's gone around the world. I probably shouldn't be mentioning in a mixed company here, the 7th President of the United States. You all know who that is, of course. His name was Old Hickory. You know, lacrosse sticks made out of hickory. It's that tough. And about that time, George Beers was writing civilized, so to speak, rules so that us gentle white people could play the game. There was a painter by the name of George Catlin. He went west, unfortunately, with a group that General Jackson wanted to go west. And he watched the game being played, and he painted and drew the game. There were no cameras back then. And he wanted to sell his artwork. So when he brought these paintings back to the base at St. Louis and in New York City, he embellished on them and made them a little more uncivilized, like we wanted to see. He was an American. And when he fixed the paintings, when he came back to St. Louis and to New York, we were all a little alarmed that this native game was played this way. He chronicled what happened from about 1815 through the late 19th century. Dr. Beers was a dentist, as I said, in Canada, and he wrote the first rules and got the Canadian Parliament to adopt it as the national sport of Canada. It's just been recently that the Canadians have decided that they wanted hockey included. And it's been in the last several decades that they've added hockey. They haven't eliminated saying that they invented lacrosse as we know it, and they won't say it's not a national sport of Canada, because it still is. But they've included now hockey. I grew up just a couple of years ago in Syracuse, New York. I was fortunate enough to have a very fine coach. He also put the roof over my head and clothed my body. And Coach Simmons Sr., and I wasn't going to escape the game. It was played about 2 miles from my house on the reservation in the box. Field was played also, and they would come to the university and play Syracuse University as the Onondaga Athletic Club, strictly native. And we would go out there and exchange and play their game in the box, which was really a mistake. And so I grew up in the coach's house, and I learned about the game from the early 50s, late 40s. and learned how to catch and throw. My biggest thrill was on a Sunday afternoon, my father would put me in the car and drive me out to the Onondaga reservation, where there was a number of stick makers. And he would tell me he would buy me a stick. It was my choice. And we would drive out there, and the sticks were made by any number of very fine craftsmen, and they would have them on their front porch. And like a little kid in a candy shop, I would drive along with my dad. I'd get out, I'd look, get back in the car, get down the road, I'd get out, and I'd look, and finally, I would pick a stick. Wasn't I a lucky kid? I'd bring it back to my neighborhood, where everybody was playing baseball in the spring, and they thought I was, and they knew I was a coach's kid, and that's why I had this stick, but they thought it wasn't going to go anywhere. And it really wasn't going to go anywhere. The reason being that the game revolves around the stick, which is native, and which is traditionally carved by the natives. And they know all the secrets of the wood and the stringing, the process. It was not able to be made by machine. It had to be handmade, hand-strung. And to this day, I don't know a white who can make a stick as we know it. It was almost the downfall of the game. It was the start of the game as we know it in the States and in Canada. We relied on the native for the most important ingredient in the sport, the stick. They could only make so many of them. There was an Irishman whose name was Lally, and he was a shoemaker. He came from Ireland and he immigrated to Canada. And he saw the natives playing the game, and he saw the white Canadians playing their national game. He saw that they were buying sticks from the natives, but there was a need for more sticks because the game was getting popular. So he started the first lacrosse stick factory in Cornwall, Ontario. And his last name was Lally. And if you played the game, you probably played with a Lally stick in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. He had a great craftsman working for him. His name was Frank Roundpoint. Frank was a wonderful carver, stick maker, native. All his employees were native. He was Irish. They were native. They made wonderful sticks. And Frank Roundpoint, being a fabulous carver, had some words with Mr. Lally and left the Lally factory, which was the heart of lacrosse in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and into the early 50s. Mr. Roundpoint left and went back to his reservation, Cornwall, just off the Hudson on the canal. He started his own factory. And not being a businessman, being a native and not really astute as a businessman, hired a Scotsman by the name of Chisholm. So we had an Irishman and a Scotsman controlling the making of the wooden stick, which made the sport go. Without the Lally factory and the Chisholm factory and the natives as a workman, the game couldn't progress. Well, the game caught fire in the United States. It was Canada's national sport in the field, and the natives were still playing the game. And there was a need. They could only produce so many sticks a year. The Lally factory gave up the competition in the early 50s and sold off to the Chisholm Lacrosse factory in Cornwall. And they were the sole makers of what this sport needed. Without them, the sport would have died. They made 56,000 sticks a year. And the game outgrew the making of sticks. No two sticks were the same. They were all handmade, so some were a little bit different than others. They were all strung by the ladies. The men would persevere very hard, making the sticks from hickory. Long process, it usually took about a year. Then the stick was brought home and the ladies strung them with gut and leather. So as you can see, it wasn't going to go too far. It couldn't be mechanized, it couldn't be machine driven.